Welcome to App Talk with Upptic, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of how to grow apps and games. We speak with industry experts about specific strategies, tools, and tactics they use to find success, and we keep you up to date in emerging news and trends, the ever-changing marketing, games, and technology ecosystem. My name is Xander Agosta, Director of Marketing here at Upptic, and joining me today are my co-host,
Warren Woodward, co-founder of Upptic.
And our guest,
Robby Yung, CEO of Animoca Brands.
Awesome, Robbie. We're incredibly excited to have you. We've been keeping a close eye on Animoca Brands for a while now as we dig into Web3 space, and it's really a treat.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, man. Looking forward to this one.
No problem. Excited to be here.
Great. Cool. So our first segment is Industry Insights, where we do a deep dive on industry news. There's a bit of an elephant in the room this week, as I think many people know. The Russia invasion of Ukraine is something that's kind of happened on the global scale, and it seems kind of disingenuous for anyone. It seemed disingenuous for me in order to not address it in the short term. I guess I won't speak for everybody else. So I don't want to be on I don't want to do a diatribe here about anything. This is a technology podcast, ultimately about games. But in the industry insight segment, I did think it would be interesting to dig into a few articles around how global tech companies are reacting to the invasion. And so I have a few articles, 3-word articles. I'll touch on them very, very quickly at the top, and we can just take it from there. First one is Google is a Reuters article entitled "Google drops RT other Russian state media from its news features." A little quote, Google confirmed on Tuesday it had removed state-funded publishers from RT, such as RT, from its news-related features, including Google News and search tools, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine and various sanctions against Russia. Google already had restricted news companies funded by Russian government from advertising tools and some features on YouTube. I guess I'll just quickly cover the other 2 articles. I don't really want to dig into it deep, but basically there's another article entitled "Twitter will label reduce visibility of tweets linking to Russian state media," also from Reuters. The gist of the article is that Twitter is basically de-emphasizing the ability for RT and Sputnik, as well as other state-backed media providers, from propagating on that platform. And we'll talk about the significance of that in a second. And last but not least, Facebook owner Meta says the Ukraine military and politicians were targeted in a hacking company and by hacking campaigns on Facebook. Last article. And what they've basically said is that there's been a coordinated effort across these platforms to target Ukrainian people on Facebook, and Facebook has taken action against them. Okay, so this is a really tough one because I feel like I had to address it, but on the surface, it seems like something that's obviously good, that these tech companies are taking steps to clamp down on disinformation campaigns and other ways that the Russian state are using technology platforms to target their Ukrainian citizens. However, it does sort of raise the continued question of power and responsibility of these platforms and how these are non-state actors with significant influence. And on one hand, I sort of see these as private companies, and so they should be able to act how they want. But the other hand, they're able to dictate a lot of what we see in the digital space. So, I mean, the war is tragic. I'm not in any way supporting war. And it's interesting seeing the unprecedented global rebuke, but it does give us an interesting view into the centralization of power that these platforms have. So that was a lot. I know, to throw at you guys. Any initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we know people don't come to our podcast for kind of like our insights on world politics. I mean, it's clear that like it's a tragedy what's happening in Ukraine right now, and it's interesting to see how the Web2 community has reacted. And there's a lot of obviously a lot of censorship and controlling of messaging here, but with I think most people would say good intentions. I think what's interesting to see too, and I'd love to get Robby's perspective on this. We've seen a very kind of different approach for how the Web3 community has been acting during this period too. A lot of rapid, like I'm thinking of like Ukraine DAO and some of the other means that were put into place to like rapidly get resources to people in Ukraine. Robby, I'd love your thoughts here, just sort of like how you see and would contrast like how the legacy like Web2 community has reacted to the situation in Ukraine versus the Web3 community.
So I think the Web3 community has at its disposal some, different sets of tools, because obviously blockchain and Bitcoin specifically was originally intended as a decentralized form of money.
Right.
And so it actually is kind of designed for situations like this. I found it interesting to see, posts from people who are fleeing Ukraine on Twitter. First of all, that they still are able to get on Twitter, which is amazing. But that they're saying, look, I'm glad I have my crypto, because otherwise I'd have nothing, because I can actually bring my crypto with me as I flee and go to Poland or go to Belarus or neighboring countries.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big benefit. On the other hand, I had a conversation with somebody not too long ago who advises the British government on counterterrorism. And apparently one of their big concerns is what to do with all of the Bitcoin that ISIS has in cold storage, because that's how they fund themselves. So, it's a double-edged sword. It's technology. It's a blunt instrument, and it can be used for all kinds of different purposes. I think with the only thing that I saw that I thought was quite interesting about the Web2 community was this request, a letter from the Ukrainian government to Mark Zuckerberg asking him to help monitor disinformation and hacking attacks and things like that on his platform. And the fact that the Ukrainian government has to ask Mark Zuckerberg's permission, I think highlights a problem. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I think I agree. And here's the thing is, I think, I'm pretty big critic of Google, Facebook, Twitter, Apple, like all the big tech companies. But, I do think they're trying to do the right thing in this situation. And it's just the question, and I think that's a good thing, right? To be very clear, I think that's important. The question is just around, like, should any private company have that much power? And, I think is compelling argument that they shouldn't.
Yes,
but
well, or at least be accountable to somebody in the same way that I think the media industry historically has been accountable to standards and practices. And you couldn't, for the entire childhood I spent watching television for the most part, because that's what happens when you grow up in America.
Yeah.
You can't say your product is the best on TV in an advertisement unless it's actually factually true, because there are rules for that.
The interesting thing that to contrast is, like, we have rules and law that uphold those the rules that enforce television, like you're talking about. And what's happening now in places like Ukraine is the rule of law is breaking down, and you have then these political, with military force, and you have these entities which are, in some ways transnational corporations, in some ways are held to specific standards, and now they're being the ones who are asked to come and interject in these, like, sort of pseudo lawless states. So anyway, it's a pretty interesting large scale philosophy question. We don't need to dig into it now. It just seemed like a relevant thing to bring up at the top.
So how about those user acquisition funnels?
I couldn't help it. It just seemed wrong to not touch on it. Don't worry. We have some happier news or more interesting topics.
Yeah, well, actually, this is a good bridge article, because it's actually, touching heavily on Bitcoin also, but more directly tied to the realm of games, and curious for some of Robby's opinions here. So this is actually a pair of articles around Steam. So the first one is from PC Gamer. It said 50% of Valve's Bitcoin payments were fraudulent. And then there was a very short interview from Eurogamer. Gabe Newell explains why Steam banned NFTs. So back in October, Valve made a stand banning all blockchain games from Steam platform, and they updated their policy documents to reflect the change. And we know that, I believe it was like sometime in 2016 to 2017 period, there was a period of time where Steam accepted Bitcoin for payment. And I did a little research, and I believe that 50% of Bitcoin payments being fraudulent, this is referring to like this test during the 2016-2017 period. So I'm just going to read this whole quote from Gabe. It's a little long, but I think it's interesting to discuss. So this is from the Eurogamer article. The things that were being done were super sketchy, Newell told Eurogamer. And there was some illegal shit that was going on behind the scenes. And you're just like, yeah, this is bad. Blockchains as a technology are a great technology, that the way in which they have been utilized are currently all pretty sketchy. And you sort of want to stay away from that. We have the same problem when we're accepting cryptocurrencies. 15% of the cryptocurrency paid for transactions were fraudulent, right? You look at that and you're like, well, that's bad. And then cryptocurrency volatility means that people had no idea what price they were actually paying. So they're like, how come I paid $498 US for this product? And if the answer is, that's what happens in a highly volatile currency, That's like today you're paying 99 cents for it. Tomorrow you're going to pay $498 for it. And that makes people super cranky. So it just wasn't a good method. The people who are currently active in the space are not usually good actors. So Gabe coming out pretty hard here. What do you think, Robbie? Does this make you regret all of your life decisions and all of Animoca's business decisions?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Yeah, obviously, Gabe has and Valve have an interest here too. I mean, my first thought is like, I'm sure it has nothing to do with how hard it is to apply platform fees to blockchain transactions. And Valve has their 30% fee they normally apply.
Well, and I think it's also,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say I think if that's the concern, it's very short-sighted because, because I think it's, a lot of people, when they first thought of the idea of being able to have blockchain games and essentially be able to have built-in payment mechanisms, one of the first things that occurred to people in the game industry was, oh, does that mean that we don't have to pay platform fees anymore? And and as horrible and as alluring as that sounds, honestly, it's not platform fees that make or break games, right? It's not like all games would be profitable, highly successful if it wasn't for those damn platform fees. Because at the end of the day, people who make games that make money know that the platforms provide a valuable service for which they pay. And I would more than happily pay a platform fee every day of the week if it gives me great distribution. That's the bargain. Right. And we can debate all day long whether 30% is the right number, right? Maybe 15% would be a nicer number.
Yeah.
But that's splitting hairs. The point is that a platform fee is earned. It just depends on the scale of it. And I think that what we're seeing here is perhaps a knee-jerk reaction to the concern over platform fees as an existential threat. But I think more so, we're just seeing kind of what I want to say, a typical conservative response to change, because we saw the same thing when premium games went to freemium. I mean, oh my God, you thought that the earth was going to implode when freemium came along. And then even worse was the dreaded mobile. Can you imagine playing a game on a phone on that tiny screen? Who would want to do that, right? Apparently 5 billion people. So I think it's just the game industry, for all its cutting edge technology, is quite conservative at heart. And it sometimes struggles on the margins to embrace change. Yeah,
absolutely. And, I'm sure you've seen similar things on your end, Robbie, but I mean, we've been working closely with the Axie Infinity team, getting ready for their launch for Origins, right? So part of the Animoca family, of course. But we've been meeting with the platforms and having these discussions with how we can bring Axie to these platforms. And it's not that they don't see the future and that it's sort of inevitable that they're going to have to work with this segment of gaming. It just really feels like they're getting a bit of a late start, and so they're trying to shoehorn into the existing models. And it just seems like it's going to take some time. And obviously they have to build a new business model to work with like a marketplace structure, to be educated and understand that, like, if I buy an Axie, I'm not actually buying it from Skyweaver, I'm buying it from Robby, and the developer is only taking 5% of that. So you can't tax that transaction at 30%, for example. So we're just finding that there's a lot of education that needs to be done at the highest level, and trying to be patient and work in kind of transparency with these platforms, and hope that we can kind of chart a path to bring these games to market in a legitimate way and kind of show the value of this segment. But it's going to take time.
Although I think, I mean, frankly, if you want to go all macro, I think the evolution of capitalism has continued to be one of, increasing market share and diminishing margins. I mean, across every product and industry in the world. I mean, it's astounding to me that the cost of an airline ticket from place to place is still roughly what it was when I was a student. And that was, 30 years ago. and the fact that that hasn't changed on the surface is remarkable.
Well, and there's sort of an entrenched oligopoly there, right? Like, because you need regulations in order to fly airplanes, more or less. And so look at, that's not true of Amazon necessarily, or, I guess physical goods logistics, which is how you get the Amazon business model. I mean, like the margins for games are also getting, crushed in many cases. Okay, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think it's a really reasonable way to pivot to our main topic, where we're going to talk about Animoca Brands. I guess just to kick it off, can you tell us a bit about yourself, Robbie, and your
Sure.
background and what Animoca Brands is?
Sure. So I've not been I mean, I've always played games, but I've been in the game industry for the last decade or so. Previous to that, I spent a decade in traditional media, ad-supported media, magazines, TV, outdoor radio, and then I spent a fair bit of time in telecoms and the web back in the 90s when it was kind of a new thing. And I think after, you know, 25 years in tech, one of the things that I love about gaming is it seems kind of like the convergence of pretty much everything I'd ever done across telecoms, media, and technology, because you get a little bit of all of that in a mobile game, frankly.
Right.
And that was what attracted me to the sector. And about 5 years ago, we decided to pivot from being a mobile free-to-play studio into focusing on blockchain games, which was, you know, the concept was platform agnostic, so we could still embrace mobile in one way or another. But it also, you know, taught us to learn a little bit more about building games on the web, and for sort of PC console platforms, which we'd only dabbled in previously. And I think this has been it's been a fantastic renaissance for us, but at the same time, a continued flexing of those startup muscles, because we've always acted like a hungry startup throughout our time. And even though we've had some modest success over the past couple of years in the blockchain game space, you know, as we like to remind people, we're still in the same office space that we rented literally 20 years ago. So it's not exactly an overnight success story.
Sure.
You gotta plug away at these things. And so since we entered blockchain gaming, we have a studio business where we make games across a number of different content verticals. We've got studios around the world now with lots of great creative teams. We grow that ecosystem largely through M&A at the moment, and add more teams and more titles.
Makes sense.
And at the same time, we also have an investing initiative. So we do a lot of strategic investing off the balance sheet. And I think we end up getting more sort of press ink for that just because of the frequency of our investment activity. Because it, you know, as you guys know, to make great games takes a while.
It does. Yeah, I mean, talk about being ahead of the curve for adoption of Web3 games. I mean, 5 years ago, I think basically no one. I mean, CryptoKitties was 5 years ago. Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like
so
no
we partnered with what was then called Axiom Labs. So we Axiom Zen. So we published CryptoKitties in Greater China. So that was kind of our gateway drug, and I think that experience quickly cemented our view that this was going to be something.
Right.
I don't know that we ever expected that it would be everything, but it was going to be something.
That's it. The everything question is an interesting one. I think we could have an interesting debate about how big Web3 is going to get, or in terms how much gaming is going to be transacted on Web. How much of gaming revenue is going to be transacted on Web3? I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts there. But I guess like to that one point, I mean, you have one of the most diverse portfolios of basically any Web3 company in the world: MetaMask, OpenSea, Axie Infinity, CryptoKitties, the Sandbox. You have a number of in-house games. Can you? I mean, feel free to throw in a few other ones that I missed.
Mm-hmm.
What is the core thesis around around the global adoption for Web3?
Sure. I mean, I think the thesis is twofold. One is we think everything will run on blockchain eventually, and it will just become part of the plumbing of the internet. So I think in the same way that we no longer talk about games as being online games, for example, we won't talk about them being blockchain games either, because all games will use blockchain in some fashion before too long. I think the debate there is really just a matter of when and not if. And for our sort of corporate philosophy, we believe in an open and multi-chain ecosystem. And so we very much build our product portfolio as well as our investing activity to support that open ecosystem. And so we invest across, you know, every blockchain, every platform, you know, across the ecosystem. We invest in multiple wallet providers because it's not about picking winners. The beauty of Web3 is interoperability, and the fact that everybody can actually work together and partner together. And that creates network effects. And those network effects are the most powerful force that we have, I think, as a benefit of Web3, because we can see incredible things happen. Take Axie Infinity, for example. Axie has been so incredibly successful, accidentally in the Philippines, if you know that story.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is that we have a motorsports game that's been out for a while called F1 Delta Time, a Formula One game.
Yeah.
And one of our biggest player bases is in the Philippines. But we've never spent $1 of marketing there. We never did anything in the Philippines. So why are a bunch of people in the Philippines playing F1 Delta Time? Well, because they were playing Axie Infinity and they made money. And then once they made money, they started looking around for other blockchain games to play so they could spend their crypto. And lo and behold, they found our games. So, we were the unexpected beneficiaries of the growth in an adjacent ecosystem within our sector. And I think those are the kind of network effects that we can all benefit from.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, well put. Yeah, and it can't really be overstated, like the breadth of Animoca's influence in the space currently. It's almost like when I'm researching upcoming games, if I don't see the Animoca badge of approval on something at this point, I get a little bit worried. Robby, you said something interesting, which is that you expect to see the bulk of the game's economy move to on-chain ecosystems.
Yes.
My personal bet, and sort of like our team's thesis for this next era, is that it's going to be winners that are hybrids of the ease of onboarding of free to play with the kind of like robustness and joy that can be found in the strength of community of Web3 gaming. That that A plus B is going to be the secret sauce of this era. I'm curious if you also, with your own background in mobile and free to play, do you also kind of anticipate those hybrid apps will be important for this next period, or do you see that it's just sort of like a stepping stone to, but eventually everything's going to be fully on chain? Like, do you see free to play having a important role in this next phase of gaming?
Yeah, I think there is. I think there's going to be a two-tiered system for a little while, just because I think there's going to be a variety of products, actually, because you're going to continue to see people building crypto first products because the crypto community has a lot of gamers within it, and that's how gaming started on blockchain. And so I think you'll continue to see some of those more hardcore products where the kind of DeFi mechanics, the GameFi style stuff takes precedent. And I think you're going to see a lot of people coming from free to play thinking, how can I transition so that I still have my sort of free tier of users, mass users that are doing this in a Web2 fashion, but my whales are essentially now all crypto. And I've seen many people at the moment trying to work out that model. But I do think that the onboarding sort of faff is a bit of a red herring, because I think, frankly, it's just a product of the fact that we've become so lulled into complacency with our centralized platforms. Everybody picks up their smartphone now, and it takes 1 click to download and 2 clicks to purchase. And they're like, oh, that's so easy. How can I ever do, more than 3 clicks? Well, do you remember when you first had to register your credit card to get a Google Play account or an iTunes account? It was horrible. It was literally horrible. And you were lucky if it worked the first time around. But the fact that we did it a decade ago means everybody's forgotten, because they've had all our information for so long that now we no longer need to do that again. But if you compare that process to opening a MetaMask account, I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean,
it's true. I mean, I think I agree with what you said, but you have to admit that at least in the current state, like we've all gotten quite lazy because we can just smash the get button and have the app on our phone and be playing in 30 seconds. But contrasting that to, like, I was trying to share with Xander like a game that I'd been playing a lot called Crypto Raiders recently. That's like on Polygon. And so like that had to like get on a video screen sharing call with him and like walk him through like steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the pain for like a new user, even someone who's already in the crypto ecosystem, for like coming on a new chain and getting the initial assets to play with, it's not smooth, to say the least. So there's just like there's a huge gap in between, and I wonder what you think will be like the most meaningful steps we can take to close that gap if it's not a free to play on ramp.
I think the other thing that the other thing that is happening right now is there are a lot of companies that are working on figuring out how to build those bridges and how to build those on-ramps.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are happening through payment gateway providers. Some of it's happening around people building custodial wallet systems. And some of it is happening by the chains themselves, because I think one thing that's really important for layer 1 and layer 2 chains is being able to build those bridges, because they want to benefit from liquidity. And while it's nice, for the leader, and the leader can decide not to share because they've got lots of liquidity. In this case, perhaps that's Ethereum. But otherwise, everybody else needs to be in that sharing mentality because it's what makes sense. And so I think we're seeing a lot of those bridging solutions already taking shape. And I think, in fairness, the light bulb really only turned on for this industry in terms of entertainment content once NBA Top Shot took off.
True.
You said something a little while ago, which I've just been unable to get out of my head, which is that you basically think at some point in the reasonably near future, maybe you didn't say that part, at some point it's going to be blockchains all the way down. So basically every game is going to be some sort of on the blockchain in some ways. When I think about that, compared to, are you thinking about online games, or are you thinking about all games? Because I love indie games. I play a bunch of weird indie games. A lot of them are one person dev studios. They have no interaction with anything outside whatever the heck they are. Do you imagine that at some point that even those games where it's one person dev team are going to be somehow integrated with the blockchain?
Yes, because I think if you think about it at its most rudimentary level, the idea of what we're offering to consumers is basically just a better way of what they already do. So we're suggesting to them that you go and you spend money, let's just call it that, for in-game currency, and then your in-game currency buys you items in the game. And in the blockchain world, we're suggesting exactly the same thing. It's just that your in-game currency is a tokenized fungible ERC20, most likely, and your in-game items are NFTs. But we're not asking you to have any differentiation in your experience. And that was kind of the light bulb moment for us when we first got into the sector, because we're like, oh, so we're just going to ask consumers to do exactly the same thing they already do, but offer them more benefit as a result, and it's more secure. And then you think about, well, okay, why would they want to own this stuff? Well, it might not always increase in value. I think this is one of the areas that's the bone of a lot of contention, because if you fundamentally go into it thinking, oh, the value of all this stuff is going to go up, well, then you're making a flawed assumption from day one. I think the beautiful assumption from day one is the value of all this stuff doesn't immediately go to zero the moment I buy it.
Right.
I think that's a better assumption, because I think what happens with the idea of ownership is that you create the opportunity for a secondhand market. And if we think of it not as a marketplace, but you think of it as a secondhand market where you can sell your stuff and not lose your shirt, and somebody else new to the system can buy something cheaper and try it out, well, that sounds an awful lot like when I used to sell cartridges for my console. And essentially recycle them. And this is just the digital version of that. So I think that's going to be a big part of the transactional part of the ecosystem. And there will be this niche tier of super rare, valuable content that, will be highly desirable. And there's already that in existing, MMOs and stuff like that.
Right. That's sort of like a cruel irony of some of the existing policy around free-to-play gaming. It's like we've all agreed that someone can make a $99 IAP that is instantly worth zero in a black hole of money. But if there is a chance that they would be able to later resell that asset for a non-zero amount of money, then for some reason that's something that we've all agreed we're uncomfortable with in mainstream gaming, and that's adding too much risk to the user. So it's a little funky, the corner that we've talked ourselves into.
Well, I was thinking more about the indie developer who's selling their games for $10, and that's the whole thing. There's no IPs where you're purchasing a one-time game. I think the point you were making was that okay, well then they can resell it, and I think the nice thing about being an NFT is they could get a cut of the resale and potentially. But then does that undercut their ability to earn as an indie developer?
Well, it's not... also for that indie developer, as you're talking about, what NFTs also can do, of course, is a game can be an NFT. So
Right, that's what I was thinking of, basically.
We can go back to a premium game model for those who want to, because now they have the ability to securely sell individual games.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's the same for you, Robbie, but I have some NFTs that are just software licenses for different tools that I use, basically. That's just another use case. We still, the cultural conversation is still too much around like NFT equals JPEG to like understand some of the broader and more interesting use cases.
One thing I did have a question around is like, how are you thinking about timeline? You know, I know you might have one of the best positions to answer this question out of anyone, which is like, what do you think the realistic, what is the timeline for adoption? And then like, what, if any, are the key checkpoints along that timeline for adoption?
So I think, I guess the question is what you mean by adoption. So, I mean, when you say adoption, are you talking of hundreds of millions of people?
I guess I'm thinking when the average consumer is able to interface to the Web3 ecosystem and actually does that, you know, in a way that's like, you know, the predominant way of interacting with games technology.
Oh, predominant? I'd say that would have to be a 3 to 5 year timeline.
Really, but that's fast. You think that really is going to happen that quickly?
Because I think the major impasse at the moment is going to be scaling and throughput, and figuring out those scaling solutions to be able to just run enough transactions depending on how much of your game data is on chain. That's the main problem, honestly.
Yeah. No, it's a good point, and we're trying to study a lot of areas related to that too for our own business of growing games. There's obviously some very interesting complexity that's added when you have on-chain economies in addition to like a free-to-play economy. Like how can you measure that accurately? How can you some of the titles we manage now, we're investing $1 million, $2 million a month in growing, but we can be confident in that because you can clearly see all of the data from like a traditional MMP. So that's been a super interesting area for us to research, is like the scaling of the growth aspect and the measurement of that. So like you can be confident in joining these like two disparate economies together. So, but it's going to be very interesting to see if we can get a breakthrough in that end and kind of build the first proof of concept of sustainable growth, measured growth of a Web3 game or a hybrid game. That's definitely like one of our personal goals for the next year or so of Upptic's work.
Well, and I think also you're going to see this year a lot more advertising models, because most of the games in the Web3 space have been very much focused on pure, NFT-driven, sales-driven monetization as opposed to advertising.
Yeah, it's been that first stage of growth of growing kind of within the crypto ecosystem. But very few have actually kind of started scratching the surface of how do you actually get these games in front of a mainstream gamer, and just getting them accepted as fun and great games, not like with the like NFT or crypto prefix on them, that asterisk.
That's the piece I'm waiting for, is like because if the premise is like it needs to be, the question was what's the majority? You said the answer, the majority will happen in 3 to 5 years. It seems like there'd be a bit of a delay, because like when do you think there's going to need to be a release of a significant number of these games first that then has adoption, and then at some point you're going to have a reorientation of traditional developers who are like, oh, this is the way to do it, we have to do it this way, and there's a lot of people who are taking this like initiative to try and get ahead of this, but it seems like even with that, a lot of them are going to get this wrong, right? And so my thesis, maybe this is completely incorrect, is that the vast majority of people who are investing heavily in Web3 gaming in developing Web3 games today are not going to get it right and are going to die. And that's because most games are not going to get it right and most games die.
Yeah, which is just like all games.
right. But the point I was making is like, I feel like there needs to be some sort of breakout hit that proves the model, that drives mainstream user adoption so that everyone's doing it. And then at some point, I don't know what the delay on is on that, which then you see much people copying the model.
Let's ask a more specific question. The first breakout game we get, do you guys think that it's going to come from a Web3 native company that breaks through to mainstream audience, or is it going to be from, we see companies like Jam City and Scopely that are starting to dabble or more than dabble in Web3? And who is more likely to break through, like coming from within and adding that Web3 spice, or breaking through from the outside? Would you predict there, Robbie?
I guess the question there also is how you define breakthrough. So obviously, Axie Infinity produced more revenue than any game in history.
Yeah.
If you account trading volume.
Right.
And so I think that's a reasonable breakthrough. I think if it's in terms of sheer weight of user numbers, then that means number one, it's got to be on mobile. And number two, it's most likely going to be casual. And so I think in that case, you're going to think about different kinds of models. And I think the people who are going to enable that ultimately are the middleware providers. And you've got a bunch of people out in the market now, like Forte, for example, competing to design products that are basically, shrink wrapping blockchain into an SDK. And so I think that you're going to start to see the fruits of some of those labors. I don't know how much this year. I mean, you'll still see it, but it's going to be scant on the ground in this calendar year. But I think give it, one more year and you're going to see a lot of stuff. Because I was at Pocket Gamer a couple of weeks ago and here in London, and I don't know, maybe it's just the conversations I'm having, but I didn't have any conversations with anybody that did not involve questions and discussion of Web3. And I hear the same from other people, particularly investors, companies who are pitching new projects. And they're like, every investor asks me, what's our Web3 strategy?
Yeah. Well, my question is like, is this, how much is this the adoption of free to play, like freemium from premium, or how much is this like esports, right? Because remember, 6 years ago, everyone needed an esports strategy, 10 years ago, and everyone invested in it. And you couldn't talk about launching a game to a mass multiplayer audience and not have it. And now it's like, you're talking about esports, right? No one.
I think it's because what's happened over the last couple of years between a reasonable handful of games that have been successful and kind of proven the model out. I think that we've seen a huge force of gravity of the investment community backing projects. So I think you're going to see the fruits of those investments over the course of the second half of this year. There are going to be a lot of games coming out that got funded last summer. And I think that there's a general consensus, which you guys know, once you start to look into blockchain and Web3 and you really start to dig and you try it out, you never go back, right? Because something clicks eventually when you get it. But it is a bit of a religious conversion, right? Yep. It's one of those things that it's like home ownership. And it's one of those things that if you've rented your entire life, you cannot explain to somebody who's rented their entire life what it means to own their own home, because it's just not something they've experienced. But the moment you have the luxury to do that, you look back at your life renting and you think, why did I rent for all those years? That was stupid. Because ownership is so logical.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that on a premise level. I think so for me, like I'm a gamer through and through, and I think that the thing that I'm still missing to go all in on Web3 is I still love the gaming experiences that exist outside of Web3, and there aren't a ton of gaming experiences that are creating the experiences completely. I want in Web3, and that's the piece that as a gamer I need that first and foremost.
Yeah,
and I'm happy to pour money into the system. Like trust me,
they're coming though, right? They're coming.
Well, and I've been hearing it for a year.
And I think the thing is that those kind of experiences are coming. And I think that the key is to think about what mobile was like back in 2011, right?
Please no.
Well, because it takes time. And what happened with mobile, and the reason that we had that Angry Birds moment was because Rovio embraced the new medium and figured out a way to make the swiping and the interactivity of the touch screen gamer friendly by changing the paradigm a little bit. Remember when we had on-screen joysticks and how horrible that was on mobile, because the old paradigm didn't quite work. And so I think we're in that awkward teenager phase right now in Web3 where people are getting used to some of these new tools and trying to figure out what can be done with them. And what does it mean, to have interoperability between multiple metaverses and to be able to bring my stuff across. And so you're going to see a lot of crazy stuff, coming out over the next year. But people will start to make standards and these things will happen. It's happening organically. I was part of an incredible conversation a few weeks ago with a bunch of other blockchain game companies. And we were all on a Zoom talking about whether we as a group of companies could start to figure out how to create some standards. And it was a very honest conversation, as most in Web3 are. And so somebody said, so has anybody on the call ever been involved in creating industry standards before? And then the reply was, well, in the tech business, basically one company gets all the market share and then they ram the standards down everybody's throats. Right. That's how it works. And we all laughed, and then there was a silence, and we realized, well, yeah, there's no democracy for standards in tech, but now we're trying to figure out how that would work, because that's what Web3 is all about.
Like HTTP and www were like the last standards, right? And like that was quite a while ago.
Yeah, exactly. Facebook Connect, right?
Part of why Web3 gaming has a bit of a stigma against it currently is we're seeing the same thing that we saw early in mobile. To your point, Robbie, where what comes to market the fastest, what can you spin up overnight, basically. And for better or for worse, we are in a bit of a cash grab phase with the amount of funding going to any Web3 games. But at the same time, I see the banner behind you for Blowfish, an amazing studio. They're building this game called Phantom Galaxies, which I think is a clear AAA quality game. I got to play the alpha, and but those games aren't built overnight, right? These are the games that similar
and don't
to
forget
traditional.
That Phantom Galaxies has been in development for 2 years. Which is how long it takes to make a game like that.
Exactly. So I just encourage people to be patient and realize a lot of the coolest stuff is being built right now, but we're not going to have our hands on it for a little while still. But you can still see those works in progress. You can become involved in those communities.
Well, and I think the thing about Web3 that's so exciting for game developers, and what many have embraced but more should be excited about, is the idea that we've also been able to sort of deconstruct the model of how you make and fund a game. Because now that content is decoupled from play experience, you're able to start building community around content sales in advance of launching your game. So you don't just have to go and find some incredibly massive sum of money and then put your head down for 2 years and hope that everything turns out okay. You can actually start building a relationship with your customers from your first NFT drop 3 weeks after, hiring a developer. That's pretty cool, right? And the idea of being able to iterate your content based on feedback from your Discord before the game launches, so that actually it's what your customers want, that's pretty cool.
I think in the cases of a good actor, it's great. I think one of the things that is the unfortunate reality of, much game development, and I think is applicable here too, is that games are hard to make, and not every game that is developed gets launched. And so if you're pre-selling content and and the game never comes out, that's kind of a rug pull. That kind of sucks. That has happened and will continue to happen. What was the other point I was going to make? I don't know. Anyway, I lost it. Anyway, there's a point you had made quite a while ago around Forte and how sort of the infrastructure of the core of Web3 is being built now, and we expect to see SDKs drop next year and a lot of these other pieces that are sort of falling in place next year. I want to ask around, how does Animoca Brands view Web3 infrastructure as part of their business? So do you see that the infrastructure investments is a core of the Animoca Brands business, or is it ancillary to games, or how do those two interact in terms of how you think about your company?
Sure. We make plenty of infrastructure investments, what we call ecosystem investments, because that's really important. And we invested in Forte, we invested in a number of companies that provide tool sets and help to onboard people, because our mission is to onboard people to blockchain through games. And so whatever companies and tool sets can assist in making that happen, the faster and on the more mass scale, the better. Because what we've done in designing our business model is essentially we've invested across the ecosystem, and so we've made it in our own best interest to encourage the growth of the ecosystem, because if blockchain gaming survives, then we will do well. And so we don't have to play favorites or anything. We just want everything to grow.
That makes sense.
Robbie, on that note, what is Animoca's philosophy on within your entire portfolio? It seems like there's not a lot of centralized resources. I mean, but maybe first of all, correct my assumption if that's wrong. But it seems like there's a high culture of autonomy between all of the different entities, collaboration, but not necessarily like centralization of resources that you might see in like a more traditional publisher, or maybe you know, yeah. Would you like to share some of the strategy and thoughts around that?
So I think we do take the federated studio model approach, like some other players in the industry, you know, like Stillfront or MTG or Embracer, and we do that because I think we also share a philosophy perhaps that they have, that there are a lot of great game studios out there that make games at relatively small scale, you know, teams of 10, 20, 30, 40 people that make incredible games. And they don't necessarily need to be bigger. But one of the things that's difficult to do when you're that size is to do everything involved in running a game's business. And so we find lots of great studios. You know, if you have 25 people, it's very hard to have a UA and monetization team and a marketing team and, you know, in-house counsel and a finance team and HR, and all that stuff just, you know, ends up eating time of founders and other people who have to wear multiple hats. And so what we try to do in terms of centralization is centralize some of those services, some of those non-game development services, let's call them. And that then all the studios can benefit from. And obviously some of the bigger studios, you know, Sandbox, the team is enormous now, so they don't need to rely on us so much for those kind of things. But for the other studios, yes, we centralize those types of things so that we can sort of release the founders back into the wild to go back and write code and develop games. Because I can't tell you how many founders I've met who spend the majority of their time doing things that are not game development, even though that's why they started the business, just because, you know, being an entrepreneur is hard.
Yeah, so it sounds like the plan is to continue to give like high amounts of autonomy from a development standpoint. But you touched on, obviously our team is thinking about growth and user acquisition. It's the core of what we do. Is that an area where it sounds like at some point you might want to, or do you have, or do you plan to have more centralized, like shared resources for that?
Yes, we do have we have shared resources for that, and also we try to centralize that for the purpose of partner relationships as well, and that way we can partner with external providers on a group basis.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The interesting thing about your position as Animoca Brands is that because it's all on the blockchain predominantly, the ability to collaborate between studios, I think, is, I don't know how much you guys have done this yet, but if it's all interoperable, becomes a very interesting incentive to create collaboration, incentivize collaboration across games, across your portfolio in a way that is not possible by someone like Stillfront. I mean, we've worked with a lot of the teams there, and they are very much siloed in many ways. I think that it's interesting to see how that may not be the case for you guys.
Yeah, well, we're hoping. I mean, part of the idea of thinking about interoperability was that we all know it's going to be hard. It's very hard, and so the best way that we can encourage it is, of course, to encourage it in-house first amongst our different studios. And then through our investing activity, where we invest in companies and, you know, in lots of other game studios too, and we encourage them, hey, you know, we've got all of these great games, you know, we've got the Sandbox and F1 Delta Time, et cetera, and would you mind, you know, considering interoperating your content with some of these games, because we can offer you direct access to all these studios as an incentive, you know, to work together. Hopefully we can foster more of that cooperation.
Yeah. Cool. We're running close to time, so I wanted to ask you one. Oh, there's actually two I want. Okay, so actually, we sort of talked about this early. We'll just go ahead to the last question. So what are either interesting projects or games or macro trends in the Web3 space that you think our listeners should keep an eye
on? It's a big question.
Yeah, that's
why it's a sign-off question.
So I think the big thing, I think there's an interesting trend that I've been following for a while, which, you know, we're dipping our toes in the water. We have a studio called Ingame, and they're doing mobile Web3 apps, and it's basically a ad-supported business that includes a play-to-win model or play-to-earn model now, where you can earn blockchain rewards based on playing casual games. And the idea there is to try to figure out a way to onboard casual mobile content into Web3, because most people think that NFTs in Web3 only work well for mid and hardcore games that have strong collectability aspects.
Right.
But I think there are other models that can be innovated, and cracking that code, I think, is interesting, because if you can, then you can also publish at scale, because something like what we've done at Ingame is actually a generic solution.
Interesting. So basically just broadening the model for what you think can be a successful Web3 game, and how do you get to a game that fits massive scale and the ability to go broad with your marketing, it sounds like.
Yes. Yeah. So for example, a lot of game companies have used skills with a Z in the past, and that's a particular type of model. But it's also a model that's conducive to transitioning to a Web3 model and replacing it with Web3 infrastructure.
Yeah, there's a few products that have, we had one on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, Punch Games. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but yeah, that ostensibly that's one of a couple I've seen of essentially like skills on the blockchain with a casual rewards competitive ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, because also it changes, going back to esports. I mean, esports on blockchain is incredible because it changes the whole model. Basically, because you go from a sponsorship model or an advertising model to a winning model, and to the idea that you're just literally the best player wins, and you can be anywhere in the world with an internet connection. You don't even need to have a bank account.
Right, and you can be getting paid. Yeah, I mean, that's a fascinating space to explore. Well, Robbie, this has been a really, really enlightening conversation. I wish we had another hour, because it's, I think we can continue to pick your brain for a while to come. But we are close to time, and so we're going to pivot to our last section, which is app of the week. Robbie, did you bring an app this week?
I brought an app this week, although it's kind of a boring and slightly expensive one, but it's me getting out of my comfort zone. I'm experimenting with Superhuman.
Nice.
If there's anything sacred in my workflow, given my age, it's email. And because despite how many Telegram groups I'm in and all these kind of things, email is still my go-to communication medium for working.
Right.
So trying something completely new with it is very much out of my comfort zone. So that's my app of the week.
Does it work? I mean, I'm a Gmail addict, right? I'm trying to understand how much incremental. I have a friend who works there, and he raves about it. But is it good?
Yes, but it requires it's an interesting process, because they onboard you with a human for half an hour to teach you a new way to approach doing email, and that's part of the secret sauce.
Interesting.
So it's not just about new software; it's about teaching you a different philosophy of how to handle your email. Because the idea is this inbox zero idea, so that every email should be dealt with, but dealt with doesn't mean responded to. It should be, snoozed to a particular time, or it should be handed off so that, you can manage the flow. Because I'm one of those people who tends to get overwhelmed with volume.
I can only imagine.
That's super interesting. I didn't know about that human onboarding piece. That's fascinating.
My friend runs that human onboarding team. Anyway, not about him. Cool. Well, Warren, do you have an app this week?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is going to shock you guys, but I have a Web3 game this week. No. So it's part of, we mentioned earlier, part of the battle that we've been fighting here lately has been, trying to work with the Axie team and these platforms to understand how Web3 games can be accepted on mobile. Because as you said, Robbie, like for mass adoption, like we need to get on mobile. It's just for people that have no other gaming device. So one thing I've been researching is just the Web3 games that one way or another have made it onto mobile so far. And the one I downloaded this week that I'm going to start playing, I just started dabbling, is called Skyweaver. I'm sure you guys are both familiar with it.
Horizon but this Games, one,
yeah, Horizon blockchain games. Are you an investor in them as well?
No, we're not, but I know Michael quite well.
Cool. So I'm excited to dig into this one. I'm a big TCG player, as Xander knows. We met initially talking about Hearthstone Magic. I was formerly competitive Magic player, but I have been, since I discovered Web3 gaming, I haven't been playing much of digital magic as I used to. I started playing Gods Unchained, and Skyweaver is another, looks like high quality TCG.
I hope you've played Splinterlands.
No, I haven't yet.
Oh my God.
Okay, cool. That's on the list.
Splinterlands.
All right.
Yes.
Future app of the week. But Skyweaver looks pretty good. A game designer that I know that's a strong designer that also worked on Magic worked on this. The art is pretty solid. The UI is pretty clean. It looks more comparable to Hearthstone for sure. And so I'm very curious to understand how they've, I'm not deep enough yet, but it looks like there's basically parallel levels of play where you can have the same card in like a non-tradable way, just within the free-to-play ecosystem, or you can, this is kind of similar to Gods Unchained, that you can also own a tradable NFT version of it. So I'm very curious to dig deeper in the game and explore its depth, but also to just understand how it was, how it got through approvals on both platforms, because trying to see
a lot of time thinking about that.
Yeah, who's sneaking through the cracks and how, so we can start establishing a playbook for for future Web3 games.
Yeah.
Xander, did you have an app this week?
I do. So my app this week is like the opposite of a Web3 game. It is a game though, which is Horizon Forgotten West. Playing it on PS4. It's AAA game, Sony in-house, PlayStation exclusive. And I gotta say, I haven't played it on PS4 in like 3 years, but it is so good. It's like action RPG, gorgeous. Honestly, the best looking cutscenes I've ever seen in a game. It's absolutely gorgeous. So much fun. Snappy controls, cool world. Highly recommend playing it for anyone who wants to drop $60 for an 30 or 40 hour gameplay experience. Really, really solid game. Cool. That's our app of the week. Robbie, thank you so much for joining us. If someone wants to get a hold of you, I'm sure you don't need more emails, but if someone wants to get a hold of you or wants to find out more about Animoca Brands, how can they do that?
No problem. I'm on LinkedIn or else Twitter at View from HK. So yeah, those are usually the places people find me.
Awesome. Warren, do you want to take us out?
Yeah, absolutely. So as always, the podcast this week was brought to you by the team at Upptic. And Robbie, thank you so much for joining us. It's one of the conversations we've been most looking forward to. So here at Upptic, we do two things. We basically have our growth services team, which is like our bolt-on growth marketing team handling the UA, the creative, the marketing analytics to grow games. And then we also have our Upptic platform, which has automation tools for ASO, for UA. And in production this year, we're actually building out the first kind of cross-platform measurement to unify measurement from traditional free-to-play and blockchain ecosystems for a lot of the upcoming Web3 games that we're working on. So it's a super fun team to be a part of because we work on both the tech and the in the field side, getting the work done. And if it sounds like any of that stuff could be useful to you, we love to talk and learn about new projects, meet new teams. Just reach out to us at upptic.com. That's upptic.com.
Awesome. Talk soon.